I have a large fascination with anonymity and anonymous characters. I think partially because with anonymity, the imagination does a lot to fill in the blanks. It hasn't been uncommon for me to see anonymous characters on the internet and try to extrapolate as much as I can about them from the little information that I have. On Denpachan, for example, not the best website in the world. In fact, I would say it's probably pretty bad. There is a tendency that I have when looking at certain people's posts, people who I've only been able to identify by similar typing styles and a similar theme across their various posts. Um, there's a sort of feeling I get of intrigue about certain posters where, you know, it's like I want to know more, but then at the same time, if I were to know more, it would almost spoil the magic of it. And that feeling of intrigue and curiosity that is generated by the anonymity of the posts is something that I find I'm not entirely sure how to describe it. Very I don't want to say fulfilling, but it's something that fills me inside. That came out that came out way wrong, but you get the idea. And I've felt this way, you know, in various ways. I felt this way when I've encountered bloggers, for example, that don't show their face, that don't have social media, that appear very invested in the interest that they have. I get this impression about them like maybe these guys are low tech and maybe these guys are not the most social people, or if they are, they're almost like living in a different decade, a different era. Maybe they're not subject to all of the tech tyranny that the rest of us are. And I find their way of life very inspiring, or at least my conception of what their way of life is. You know, I don't have a cell phone. I haven't for a while. I'm not on social media. I'm not someone who seeks interactions with the rest of the world, and I'm heavily considering not even having a computer pretty soon. As long as I can download a large enough amount of files, learning materials, for example, and have a way to utilize them, I'm considering just literally not using the computer. And so, um, I don't know, man. There's just this ick that I get about the world of technology in so many ways. If I want to upload videos on my YouTube channel or posts on my blog, I can have the files saved and then go do it at the library. I don't even need to own my own computer. And maybe in that way, I would be living in a manner closer to some of these more anonymous characters on the internet. I think there's just something so fascinating about them. Um, but I have never been able to be and will never be able to be one of them because I have a different mission with this channel, and I always have. For basically since its inception, I had this goal of becoming an archive, of posting all of the things that feel real. Um, and that hasn't stopped. I still want that kind of content to be out there. I want more of it to be created, but that doesn't that doesn't make anonymous people or mysterious people less intriguing for me. I think both have their place. The people that you can find out absolutely everything about, and also the people that leave more to the mind. There's a good example of this, of someone who leaves a lot to the mind on YouTube. I want to share his channel, but I don't want him to get harassed, so I will not. But needless to say, I've been watching his videos for years now, and it's always that same feeling, you know. I think I don't know. It's really hard to describe. Someone asked me about this like 2 months ago. Why do you have this fascination with these characters? And I find it really hard to describe. It's just this visceral emotion that I feel about their posts and their existence. And I find it such a fascinating way to approach the internet, particularly in the modern day, an admirable one, you know. I don't want necessarily to be as public these days as I was in the past, you know, posting all the time. You've seen that from me. And I feel more interested now in just posting when I have something that I feel like is worth posting. I have all sorts of ideas that I could deliver. I have all sorts of experiences and memories that I could tell about. But I find myself just sort of going, it's a YouTube thing, posting all the time. I don't know. I don't feel crazy about it, you know. If I post, it's going to be something that I feel like is worth posting. If I have extra bits of things, I post them on Osaka at night, or I post them on OsakaSyndrome Bites, and then that's it, you know. I think I am moving more in the direction of these kinds of people. You know, one of my favorite bloggers, Nervewing, someone who works in the chemistry industry, someone who has been experimenting on themselves with all sorts of research chemicals since they were in high school, is another example of one of these very intriguing characters. We've never seen their face. We don't really know what they are, you know. And yet, the depth of emotions in all of their blog posts, like hundreds of trip reports at this point, the depth of emotion is so vivid. They really make you feel whatever they feel, and it's partially because they are an incredibly eloquent and talented writer, but also their depth of knowledge for the subject of structural activity relations, for the subject of psychopharmacology and chemistry, are very apparent. It's apparent that they work in the field. And the fact that there is not much known about this person makes the glimpses of their life that we do get all that more meaningful, when they provide details that sort of allow you to fill in the gaps that previously existed in the narrative. It feels very satisfying. And I think that's part of why I enjoy anonymous figures on the internet so much. It's actually out of the same desire that I have to see people who are very much not anonymous. People like the artist formerly known as Digibro. That's an example of someone who is very much not anonymous, and in terms of the sheer amount of content that I create, my channel could certainly be compared to hers. I think there's something there, you know. For whatever reason, I have always been absolutely fascinated with other people's lives, with their rants, their inner thoughts, their emotions, and I've always wanted to know more. There are people that are humble or privately minded, and they don't want to share all that much. But in those moments in which they do, I feel incredibly lucky to be able to create a larger mental image of who they are. Um, Without delving too much into my own personal psychology, I do have something called hyperfantasia. A lot of the people, maybe not a lot, but certain people who watch my channel have told me that they have something called aphantasia, where essentially you can't see images in your head, you can't hear sounds, you can't I forget what's the other thing, maybe smells. They can't basically they can't have thoughts. And I find this very fascinating, particularly because there are people with very high IQs and very successful in various fields that have aphantasia. Like, how does that even happen if you can't have thoughts in the way that the rest of us understand them? It feels very bizarre for me to try and imagine. But needless to say, I've heard various people talk about this. I have literally the opposite. I have hyperfantasia, where when I am reading something, or when I'm thinking about something, whatever, I have these very vivid images that come to my mind, and it almost feels as though I am living in that image if I'm thinking about it enough. They feel like lived in places that are moving, that are clear, that I can see. And when I'm having conversations with myself, it's much the same. Although I would say that I get more imagery than I do hear things, but I also hear things quite clearly. I think I think there is something to do with that, with my fascination with these people, because particularly when they write evocative things on the internet, I'm reading their posts and I have all these images that come to my head of how the story is playing out, or how I think their life might be playing out. And I think this also relates to my memory as well, because even though I have at many times preferred not to have this type of memory, I remember basically everything. There was a period of time when I was on antipsychotics when that was not so much the case. And there have been various ways that I've deliberately tried to make myself more forgetful, to no avail. I still remember huge quantities of things in relation to basically everything. And that also relates to this, because when I'm reading these people's posts, I'm not just reading that post. I have a chronology of every previous post that they've made in my head, and I'm comparing the things that they say to all of the other information I have about that person in that file on them in my head, so to say. And this is peculiar because when I've talked to people as well without autobiographical memory, which is apparently a thing highly correlated, highly related to aphantasia, people who have one tend to have the other as well. They find this just incredible. People who can remember things, but they can't place them in an autobiographical order. I've talked to people like this, several people like this, and I have been able to give them more detail about their own life than they could give me, simply because I remembered every conversation I had with them. And I detailed to them as a sequence of events, actually putting it in order, these various things, and they come away like, oh wow, that actually did happen. What the fuck? Not even I knew that. And it's because they don't have autobiographical memory. But I do. And I have it quite strongly because I can remember all of the various details of not just my own life, but also the lives of those around me. And this, I think, relates to my fascination with anonymous characters on the internet, because when I am looking at their posts, I am not just looking at it in a vacuum. I am comparing it to absolutely every other post that that person has made at my disposal, psychically speaking, and I am forming a larger mental image of them in my head. The gaps in my understanding feel as though they're being filled, which is enriching in itself, because it feels as though this experience of discovery and of mystery is actually leading to something. I'm actually forming a better image of this person in my mind. However, it wouldn't feel fulfilling without the mystery being there, because it's one thing to really enjoy content from people who are very public and who you can access all this information about, which I do enjoy. But it's another to actually put the pieces together and form a concept, a model, if you will, of someone else in your own mind. That's a different experience. And that feeling of just all the pieces coming together, but you still don't have them. There's still more on the horizon for you to learn and for you to piece together, and it's very likely that you'll never piece it all together. I find that whole process very fulfilling, very enriching, very exciting. And so I end up having a set of fairly, I think, idiosyncratic reasons for why I love anonymous characters on the internet.